All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you
Wow,
so
I didn't
much
even
for
realize it does this.
listening. And yeah, it actually says, yeah, recording in progress. I know that's kind of weird, isn't it? But
I have not used Zoom this entire pandemic, so this has been very.
how?
I'm still
How?
learning.
I
So,
do everything
uh,
like through Zoom.
well, well, I use Microsoft Teams now, so
Oh,
it's a
that's
little
why.
awkward.
Yeah, Teams is one of the ones. Yeah. But hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Today on the podcast, I have Byran Sarmiento. So a little bit about Brian. I met Brian in college, and he was actually the jazz drummer for a jazz band. And right away, he's just an excellent musician, very talented, very good, and very multi genre oriented. Has experience playing in multiple different genres. Has experience composing in multiple different genres, and we worked on a couple of projects together. And for me, Brian, like your production and your knowledge behind production, I think is really really good. And I wouldn't just say that just to say that. I actually truly believe like me and Anna listen to your stuff, and there's just a certain way you mix certain things and certain elements, and I'll just point it out like what I kind of hear when I listen to your mixes, man. That I just think
All right,
is really 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 good,
I
and
appreciate it.
really really good. And I truly mean that. So but anyways, that's kind of where the podcast is going to go. But anyways, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian?
All right, well, as y'all know now, my name is Brian. I actually I actually picked up the saxophone. That was the first instrument I ever
Really,
played
I didn't know
back
that.
in middle school. Yeah, I did saxophone at first, and I did middle school jazz band. I think it was like first chair for saxophone for like a little while when I did it in middle school. But I got into high school, I kind of diverted a little bit away towards a lot of like the orchestra and the marching stuff. And it wasn't that I didn't necessarily enjoy it. I just knew that I very much enjoyed, very much a lot of like I listened to a lot of rock music. There was another rock like group teen band that had formed during that time, and I thought it was very interesting. And so at that, as I was like exposed to that, I essentially told myself, hey, that's like something that I want to do. So that's when I started picking up the guitar. And I remember my first band didn't have a bass player, so then I learned how to play a little bit of bass. And I was kind of a lot of the musical knowledge that I've gained in terms of the different instruments that I've picked up has been because I've been filling the role. When I became a drummer, it wasn't because I intended on playing drums. It was, well, you have better time than our other friends, so just grab a pair of sticks, start practicing, and let's see what happens. And then I ended up doing that for quite a while. And when I got into college, that's when I went in, tried out for the music department, and luckily, fortunately, got in. And I was a little unsure of what I wanted to do when I first got into the music department. And unfortunately, like I did kind of sway away, and like I did go into accounting and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I still kept up with like the projects I was working on, writing music for the bands that I was in, and also just, collaborating with people whenever I could. And I remember having the small interest when I started college of doing music recording and production. But I know what they taught there was a little bit different. I mean, everybody has a different curriculum and stuff like that, but that didn't necessarily interest me, just the general basis. But I decided fairly recently, about a year and a half ago, to kind of just look up how to do it myself, because I always played around with like GarageBand and stuff like that. But I just decided a year and a half ago, I saved some money. I was like, I'm gonna buy some stuff. I'm gonna really dive deep into this, and just really learn all the stuff about it, because I've always loved composing and writing music. And I think a little bit more than playing now. Like I still enjoy playing by all means, but there is just something where I really feel like I'm putting my all in any project that I do, and I put a part of myself, whether it's for myself or as a part of a group, or just helping a client out and providing ideas.
Nice, man.
So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
So that's awesome because I'm kind of like the same way as far as when it comes to production. I feel like we both had the same method, which was wing it and learn everything online.
Yeah.
Literally
Honestly,
like
YouTube has some really good
it has
videos.
really
I'm
good
not gonna lie.
stuff.
I've learned so
Yeah.
much stuff.
Oh yeah,
I
for
saw this
sure.
EQ video the other day, and I was like, oh
I
my
think it's all
god,
really
like this is
online
so
now, you know what
detailed.
I mean? I think college, even
Hmm.
for like accounting or like math, I think sure, for a company, like the piece of paper is like what they like want. You know what I mean? But like for the
Yeah,
actual skills of like things, you know, where
you have to do it.
the industry is the industry, the music industry, is more about, do you know what you're talking about and can you make a good product? Not, do you have a piece of paper
Hmm.
that says you can for a company? It's like a different thing, you know what I mean? So like in that
Yeah.
regard, if you know what you're doing and you can learn it, like, the way that you did, which was literally looking up YouTube videos and researching it, learning what equalization is, learning that means cutting, boosting frequencies, learning compression, learning, threshold,
Hmm.
ratio, attack, release, all that kind of stuff, and learning, how to put that all together. It can be very daunting at first, but like I feel like you kind of were like me, you did it through trial and error.
Exactly. And I think it is one of those things where I think, it is very important. Like, I think you can learn all you need to about that stuff from whether it's the classroom or YouTube. But at the end of the day, what's the most important tool in all of that is your ear.
Yeah.
So it's just, listening to music, like really analyzing somebody else's mix and being able to hear, oh, like I see how they did that, and like just really thoroughly understanding that and like learning that kind of like balance, and like it's training your ear at the end of the day.
Yeah. What
And I
I
think, for us, we have that musical background, which,
that was
I think
actually what I was
helps a
gonna
little bit.
say. I think what I find when I first started listening to like podcasts on it, or I heard other people talk about like mixing. You know what I mean? Every once in a while, like they would get lost in the technical stuff, but then they would just say something, and I'm just like, wait a second, you guys didn't like know that? You know what I mean? And I'll give you an example, like automation, for example. They're like, now,
Hmm.
when you play string instruments, you don't want the string instrument to be the same volume the whole time. You want to have some automation in volume as they crescendo and decrescendo. And like I remember
Yeah.
like some things like that, and I'm just like, man, these guys have never played in an orchestra before. Or
Yeah.
like these guys have never
What
played
is
in a
what is
band before.
pianissimo?
Exactly. Like, oh wait, you were supposed to have dynamics? You know what I mean? But yeah, I always thought that was really funny. So like I think, for people that are like trying to learn how to mix and stuff like that, having a mixture of a musical background is one of the best things you can do for yourself, because certain things will just be intuitive to you. Like interest in drums. Like the drums shouldn't play the same 12 bar thing every like 12 bars, you know what I mean? Like you have to have some variety in the
Yeah.
drums to make it interesting, or else people will definitely
Hmm.
not like it. Or like,
Exactly. And
like
like
having,
layering instruments and stuff like that too.
yeah, chords, stuff like that. But like I think it becomes cool, especially if someone knows their sound design. I think that's where it's really like music's kind of going with EDM. I actually think that's very interesting. Is where you can combine like the music theory knowledge and then start to do all like the layering and stuff like that, and start creating like these interesting sounds that like go together well.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I think that's a really cool development that's
Yeah.
happening. You know what I mean? All right, cool. So, something that I kind of heard you say there was you play multiple different instruments, and I've always thought that was really cool when someone's able to play multiple different instruments, because I kind of started out that way too. I can play like a little bit of drums, you know what I mean. Most of the drums you've ever heard me
Hmm.
do were programmed because I don't have a MIDI drum set, but I can do a little bit of drums. I obviously can do piano, but I can also play guitar and bass, and I've always felt like a strong foundation in theory is why I'm able to switch between instruments. But from your perspective, how have you been able to like navigate playing different instruments? Like how did you just learn how to play
So
bass and then learn how to play guitar and then learn how to play drums and then saxophone? You know what I mean?
honestly, my theory is probably the weakest, and I'll even
Really?
admit it, probably one of the weakest going into like the music department at all. Like it wasn't bad. I very much kind of learned a lot of things by ear. Like a lot of the drum stuff, I could not listen to that. Like I'll be completely honest, in jazz band, I know I did kind of struggle a little bit, but I kind of memorized the length of the tune, and I very much kind of felt the direction of the song. Like even if there were certain stops, like yeah, I would learn the rhythm behind it, but I would learn it not necessarily based off of looking at the music and like dissecting it. I could, but I was slow at it. I very much listened to, okay, this is like how what is being played by the band. I'm supposed to match that, and mentally I can just kind of fine tune that rhythm, just because I've had years and years of just listening to music and learning
Mm-hmm.
parts just from that alone, so to speak. And then guitar and bass and stuff like that, I learned tabs, which was kind of the easy way out.
Oh, you did
But
tabs?
granted, I was
Oh,
also
okay.
pretty young. I was also pretty young, and when I was in middle school, like I did learn music theory. I knew I knew notes on the saxophone. I obviously read saxophone, like sheet music for the saxophone and everything. Like, that was second nature to me. But translating that over to guitar was a little bit more difficult for me. So I kind of swapped towards that more tab based kind of ordeal.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it functioned for me. Like I do think it was a hindrance in some regards, building chords, but at the end of it, I kind of focused more on developing my ear, what kind of sounded right. Even when I was writing songs, I mean, you can instinctively tell when something sounds right and when something sounds
Yeah,
wrong.
you built
And
that
at the
inner
same
ear.
time, I also, yeah, no, exactly. And I also listen to a lot of different genres and a lot of weird music too, like whether it's instrumental tracks and or metal, which kind of uses, even though it's like major and minor, like the predominant keys or types of keys in music in the west. I had to think about that for a
Well, yeah, you had
second.
major and
Like
minor
in the
chords.
US and
Yeah, you had the
everything.
major and minor chords. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's predominant. But I mean, you hear these bands utilize different modes and stuff like that, and utilize all these different instruments, and you kind of like also gain a sense for it just by listening to it
I
as
do agree with
well. The
that, and
Contortionist is a good example.
I do agree with that. I think I think a pitfall of learning a lot of theory is people learn it. It's almost like I do martial arts and stuff, so like it's like the guy who's so involved in
Mhm.
learning how to punch someone in the face, they never actually like learn how to do it. They're caught up in the theory of how to do it. Does that make sense? Like I don't know if you ever met a
Yeah.
martial artist who like is all about the theory of how to actually do it, but then when it comes to actually doing it, they're terrible. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever? I think
I
it's
have a
kind of
few
weird
friends.
analogy.
I have a few friends. I know some people who are super theory based. I remember I've written with people who very much think about that first, and it's like, oh well, maybe we should add the like seventh, or maybe we should like down to like this, yada yada yada. And I was just like, I mean, I get that, but that doesn't sound as good as just us
But
doing
like
like maybe
that's
the
like
traditional way, or
that's
maybe hitting
literally
this note. And
yeah, but like that's exactly it, right? And I think the trick with theory, and I think this is a good thing, is you have to theory is all it is guidelines, right? I think of theory like this.
exactly.
It's literally theory is the study of our psychology when we listen to a song. Because for whatever reason, when you play a
Hmm.
major triad, right? Something happens in our brains that creates a chemical reaction that makes us feel a specific way, right? And then if you
Yeah.
combine that with, I don't know, like a 2-5-1, or you start doing like different chord combinations that are found in theory, like our brains react a specific way to that, right? And that's why theory happened. It's why does this sound this way? You know what I mean? But the
Yeah.
the pitfall that people fall into is they learn all the theory, but then they feel like they can only do it that way. Or like if it doesn't follow
They
that
constrict
format,
themselves into a box.
exactly, they put themselves in a box because they feel like it has to be that specific way. But it's all it is just a guideline. You know what I mean? There is no
Hmm.
like right answer to music. It's all literally, does this sound right to you? You know what I mean? You could play a freaking G7 sharp 5 sharp 9 instead of a G chord, and sure, it sounds cool. You know what I mean? But like if it's badly placed
In the
and doesn't
context of
make
the song.
sense,
Yeah.
then you're wasting your time. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like
Exactly.
how
No,
I've always
I
felt
agree
about
with
theory.
that.
But for the multi instrumentalist thing, I guess tabs works. But the way it's always kind of worked for me is because like for example on piano, you have to learn how to like play a chord, right? You don't like have the
Hmm.
choice to like not know the notes of a C chord because you have to actually play the notes. And I find it the same way on like guitar, right? So when you learn the chords on one instrument, it's easier to learn the chords on another one because you've already like laid down the foundation for learning the chords, right? I'm sure. Here's an
Yeah.
example. The technique for playing a guitar, right, is very similar to the technique of playing a bass. It's your fingers, moving. Like you don't have to relearn how to like move your fingers a specific way. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So when you learn how to
Yeah.
do one
Actually,
instrument, what are you about to say?
oh no, finish. I actually I was just gonna say that. I mean, you do have a point there, especially, and also, what kind of helped me in my guitar development wasn't just tabs to really kind of learn how to write songs a little bit better, but I don't know why I just thought of this, but a lot of guitar has like the major, minor chords. All of them have very similar chord shapes. They have set
Yeah.
ones for specific types of chords. And so I learned like obviously like, okay, this is a major chord. Okay, I want to change the key, I'll just move it up. Or like this is a minor chord. And also just the patterns of my fingers. Like it's muscle memory at this point. Like
Yeah,
I
the
know this is a
shapes.
major key. I know this is a minor key. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the
And then,
shapes.
you know, just kind of
Exactly.
developing where everything kind of goes. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was answering a question from before, but
Oh,
I think I got
you're
to it.
good, you know, but I mean, like, I think that's interesting too because I mean, after a while, you know, like certain stuff just falls into a specific shape. You know what I mean? And like, I definitely agree
Mm-hmm.
with that too.
Exactly.
And but I do think it's important to like know that shape and know the context because you know, I do
Mm-hmm.
think people can get lost if they only focus on the shapes. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you only
Yeah.
know that this is a C shape, right? Or like, let's say a power chord. Let's say like the Nirvana power chord, right? So yeah, like the
Yeah.
Nirvana power chord shape. Let's say you only know power chord, right? Well, if that's all you know and you're just trying to guess based off of that, all your songs are gonna sound the same.
Exactly.
So there's also that. So I think there's
No.
the pitfall of shapes. You know what I mean? Which is why, like, you know, you have to learn how to combine the different shapes, which in a way is just theory in general, how to combine different chord progressions.
No,
But
exactly. It's playing around, messing around, trying new things at the end of the day. There's just I mean, music, despite being a series of, you know, 12 notes is, you know, there's just so much you can mess with.
I absolutely
Like
agree.
even if something sounds similar at the end of the day, you change one note, it's completely different. You play it differently. And that's the thing that's always like fascinated me, especially with like whether it's whether it's an instrument like an instrument itself or even in the voice. It's however like in a voice, like the way you sing it, if you're projecting more, it gives off a different emotion than if you're, you know, holding a little bit back and a lot more quiet. Or same thing with an instrument, a little bit more aggressive attacks on the guitar compared to, you know, a pianissimo kind of like build up. It's just same part, completely different emotion that's conveyed.
Yeah, I completely agree, you know, and that's the whole thing. Like, different chords convey, like, a different response from the brain, right? Minor, for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, makes us feel sad. It's there, you know, even if you've heard a minor chord 1,001 times, like, if you play a minor chord a specific way, like, people will feel, like, for whatever reason, slightly darker and sadder. And if you play a major chord, people will
Mm-hmm.
feel happier. You know what I mean? And it's strange. And I think that's what's so crazy about music is you're literally playing with people's brain chemistry if it's done correctly. I've always thought that was kind of crazy.
I
All
never
right.
thought about it like that, but it's something I will in the future now.
Because, like, you know, like, I'm a huge theory nut, but, like, you know, you can study all the theory in the world. It's applying the theory and making it sound good. You know what I mean?
100%.
Exactly. Theory is guidelines and
Yeah, I remember my
techniques.
first songs I wrote.
Me too.
And I think anything at the end of the day, it's also just like it is. Everything takes practice. You don't think about it, and sometimes you don't even think about how far like you've developed as like an individual musician. Because I feel like, you know, as musicians and as like an artist in general, you're pretty hard on yourself. It's very easy to be
Hmm.
because it's like always, you know, with like social media and all that, you see other people. It's like, oh, they're better than me. Oh, and like they can write a better song. But like when you really think about like the fact that you once knew nothing and then how
That's
much you know
true.
now and what you can build upon now, it's crazy to think about it. But
Right.
you
I
know,
completely agree, man. All right. So, when I was listening to, like, the way you mix, man, the first thing that really, really pops out to me is how balanced everything is. How you can hear
I
each
appreciate that.
individual
That is a
part
goal.
very, very, very cleanly and very well, and none of the frequencies are ever competing with each other. On top of that, there is dynamic contrast within each individual instrument. So whenever I try and achieve a balance like that, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is gain staging and compression, along with EQ work, right? So you EQ, you know, make sure each place has its own pocket. You gain stage so nothing's too loud than the other one, and use compression to make
Yeah.
sure the dynamic range works for each instrument, so it's not too much.
Hmm.
But you know, I'm interested to hear from you. What is, like, let's say I send you a mix, right? And you're like, okay, some things are out of balance. What's the first things you're doing to that mix?
Well, the first things that I'm doing to that one,
Like,
I
how do
kind
you
of I
achieve
it
balance in
really
a mix?
depends on like So the big thing for me is I kind of do things in sections in a weird way. I kind of it really depends on how the project starts. Because if it's one of those things, because there's times where I'm just naturally writing just by myself, I'm kind of mixing as I go, just because my ears can't take, a drum being too loud or like a guitar overpowering a vocal. Like I naturally am just always tweaking stuff. So, but if it's something that's just sent to me, kind of like how you did, that's one of those things where after all the parts are especially written and all I have to do is go in and start tweaking things, I kind of look at each grouping of instruments separately. So I always like to kind of start with drums, especially, and kind of like achieve like a good balance between the drums as a whole. So like okay, this is like the level of hi-hat I want compared to like a snare and like the kick, and like the track we did.
So like,
like,
how are you doing the
like,
levels?
the
Are
kick
you
was
doing
important
like
to me.
gain? Are you doing like gain to like control the levels? Pretty much for the most part.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do like all the natural stuff, like the EQing and stuff like that, making sure like I have the right sound for each part of the drum that I want, and then adding compression, whether it's for like an overhead or just like the kick drum where it needs to be a little bit punchier and stuff like that. And then after that, I just kind of work on the levels as itself, and then utilize automation depending on the part of the song. And so I kind of do that for each kind of grouping of stuff, whether it's guitar or like synths, I kind of group into one. I think for yours, I think I took all the pianos as one, and then I took all the synths and more like electronic sounds, and I kind of grouped it into a different bus. So I use a lot of buses, especially.
Yeah, I'm
And
huge on
if I
buses.
want to like kind of like, yeah, if I want to like, especially with like synths and stuff like that, I kind of like group them all together, and I do add like a little bit of reverb to kind of give like a more full sound sometimes. So I mean, each one's kind of different, and really at the end of the day, like those are like the basic steps that I kind of go about, but it very much is dependent on the instrument and kind of what I think that it needs for the context of the song. Like percussion especially is a little bit more where I kind of like tweak each one individually, and okay, like I'll use like different reverbs, or maybe I'll like add a delay, or just like even considering like effect tracks and all that. I think I on yours I actually threw, I don't know if you noticed it, but like for the piano I actually threw in a I threw in a send to another track. So the piano was playing through it, but I threw a guitar distortion plugin on top of it to
Really,
kind of add a
I
little
had no
bit
idea.
more
I heard like
depth
there
and
was some
airiness in the background.
da, 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 on the melody lines. I could hear they weren't a true piano. I could hear that you had done something, but I didn't know it was guitar
Yeah, I
distortion.
kept the piano in there. All I did it was guitar distortion. I kind of rolled back a little bit of the high end so it wasn't too sparkly, and
Hmm.
just let it, kind of, and I added a little bit of reverb and delay, just so it's kind of like
Nice,
floating and a little bit more airy. So,
nice, man.
but
Yeah, so essentially for the most part, and then for anyone who got kind of confused on what buses are, so what you have is individual tracks, right? These are the individual tracks in which you record. You can then take each one of those individual tracks and send it to essentially like a bus, which then has its own series of effects or things on it, so that it allows you to mix things together. For example, you can mix a kick drum, a snare drum, a hi-hat, and a crash cymbal all together, but ultimately you want it to sound like one drum. You don't want it to sound like four individual
yeah,
drums.
exactly.
So you bring it all together on a bus and mix it all together there too, after you've done like some basic stuff.
Mhm.
For anyone who's confused on what he's talking about when he was talking about what the bus is and stuff like that were. But yeah, so that's just something I've always noticed is your stuff is very, very well balanced. And when I mean balanced is like I never have to like struggle to hear something, or like I can be like, oh, this is, I can hear every single instrument feeling its exact full, and it works, and it's wide and it's full too, stereo wide too. So the
Oh,
second
stereo
thing,
width. Yeah, that was one of the first things that I was told about too, to always consider.
I think that's me too. I think
Very
everyone's
important, especially in a lot of
struggling.
today's music.
Yeah, yeah. Do you agree with left, right, center panning? Just like hard left, hard right, or
What do you
center?
mean?
Like, so a lot of people say you should either pan
Uh,
hard left or hard right, and you should never do like in between panning. I think it's called like LCR panning
so
or LRC. I
I
normally
think I
pan in the
have heard some
middle.
people say that,
I normally have panning in the middle. I'm
but
just curious.
well, it depends on the instruments that I'm using. So percussion, I think I kind of do. I'm a little bit more lenient with, where I kind of, put some stuff a little bit towards like, I don't do it hard left or hard right. I kind of put it within the space of the entire spectrum. Whereas something like guitars and stuff like that, I will do hard left and hard right, especially because I'm double tracking it, so to speak.
So you're doing
or even like a vocal.
I'll do the same thing. If I have like a guitar and I need more stereo width, I'll double track it and pan it out. So I'll
Usually
double
clean
it in
guitars,
one right.
I kind of keep. Yeah, usually clean guitars, I'll keep centerfold, just because, just tracking clean in general, and the way it sounds, it's just when you have a double track, it can conflict with each other. It really just depends. And at the end of the day, like, I wish I could very much explain to you my process a little bit more, but it is just one of those things where I just sit down, listen, and I'm just like, okay, this feels right to me. This doesn't sound full. Okay, what can I do to it? I'm always analyzing what I can do to kind of make things sound better. And I do that a lot. And I think it is because I'm a drummer with percussion, so to speak, where it's, I don't like just having a general drum groove, but I like to add a lot of auxiliary stuff. And, like, it really adds to like the builds. And there's so many times where I'm like going through it and like, I'm like, oh, I have a, like your the one that we just worked on came out to be, I think it was like 80 tracks or something, but it's just because, adding like maybe a measure of just one measure of this instrument, or, it's just because each one kind of adds a different layer and a different, I guess, pathway towards that journey, I guess.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I definitely see, I think what's funny is, do you know who Jacob Collier is?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, he does everything with his voice, right? His Logic sessions will have 500 tracks by the end.
Yeah, I 100% believe it.
And
my most has been probably about 150.
Yeah, I could just keep going and going. My computer actually can't handle it, even if they're all audio files. Like, at a certain point, my computer actually, once I hit 30 or 40 tracks, if it's all in MIDI, it will actually just not play, and it will literally crash. And
MIDI kills your computer.
Yeah, so I have to literally translate everything to audio files,
apply effects to track. And
I know, yeah. Like, you can't mix with MIDI, unfortunately. You have to translate everything to audio. That's another tip for anyone who's listening to this is, if your computer's dying, and I mean like literally dying, you must convert all your MIDI files to audio files, and I will fix that.
That was my saving grace.
All right, man. So here's another one for you, and I know this kind of comes back to drums, but I noticed, like, when you want a kick to be present in the mix, it's present in the mix. And I think out of like a lot of like mixes, I think you have really developed like a system or like a really, really good way to make your kick drum kick. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people talk about a punchy kick, but man, like, there's a fine line between like a punchy kick, right? It can't be so punchy that you can't hear anything else. And it can't be like not punchy so you can't feel the rhythm of the song. And especially in like so those are the two lines, right? It needs to be like in that sweet zone where it's hitting hard and people feel it, right? But they can hear every other element, right? And you seem to have a real good science for creating that. So let's just pretend like I send you some files, right? And you're like, oh man, this kick is either A, way too soft in the mix, or B, is just overpowering everything. What are some of the steps you're taking on that kick to make it right in the mix?
So I'll actually use, again, like the one we just worked on as an example. So I know you ended up sending me that track, and I think there were two different kicks in that, actually.
There were, because one was a splice. Yeah, one was a splice.
Part of loops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I went in, and whenever I could, I kind of separated the kicks from those mixed in tracks individually. So obviously each one kind of sounded a little bit different and had a different level of resonance. So I kind of just went in, and EQing is probably the most important thing for all that I kind of looked at. And essentially with kicks, I essentially focus on the EQ and the compression more than anything else.
In general, what does your EQ curve look like for a kick? Just in general. Like, I know it changes, but...
That's the thing. It really does depend on a kick. I usually try... So I do a lot of like side chaining because I work a lot with like 808s, because right now I'm producing a lot more I've done a little bit of hip hop beats. I'm starting to write a little bit of R&B, but like more modernized, kind of like, so there's 808s involved in it, and also Spanish pop.
Wow, man.
So since I work a lot with the 808s and stuff like that, I do a lot of the side chaining, and so while I'm boosting the low end of the kick a tiny bit, it's just kind of like finding that right frequency on the bass on the 808. I do the side chaining so I can give that kick room to breathe and still have the low end for the 808. So
And
it is
then
one of
just
those things because those two are very combating. You kind of want to like I very much focus on making sure I give both of them room to kind of project out in the mix.
yeah, I kind of feel like that's the same relationship with like a bass guitar and a kick, and like rock music is the very similar thing. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know what side chaining is, just a basic on compression. Compression either sets a floor for the volume or the loudness of a track and sets a ceiling, right? Side chaining does the exact same thing, except when you side chain compression something, you're actually doing that for another track. So as a certain track reaches a specific level, the other track will come down, so this one can be heard more, right? So that's essentially what side chaining is for anyone who's confused. Now, Brian, I have a little bit of a thing for you, a little bit of trick of side chaining, and I just want to hear your opinion. But whenever I try to side chain something, what I actually do is I'll actually double this track, right? So I'll take whatever track that I want to be heard louder. Let's say it's the kick, and let's say I want the side chaining, the synth to come down as the kick goes up, right? So I'll double the track, and I'll mute the second track, right? But I'll actually put a side chain on that track. So the second track is muted, but every time the gain on that track goes a specific high up, the synth comes down. So the compressor isn't ever working on the other one, it's just solely working on the synth. I don't know if you've ever tried that before. It's actually a cool little trick I picked up on online. I was watching. Someone actually showed how they sidechain a kick, and that was actually what they do. They double the track, but then they mute that track, right? And then they put the sidechain on the muted track, so it only affects the synths.
Okay. Yeah.
It depends on the compressor you're using.
I kind of get what you're using. Yeah.
It depends on the compressor
the ratio.
too. Yeah. It depends on the compressor too, because some compressors, if you sidechain, it will also do some compression on the actual kick drum, or do something to the kick drum itself.
Yeah, I think I've actually heard about that. I gotta look into it more. So if you have that link still, send it over, man.
Oh yeah.
I definitely I'll take whatever I can. I'm spending hours of research recently.
Good, man. Have you heard of Skillshare?
Skillshare? Actually, yes. And funnily enough, I only know that because of a movie reviewer YouTuber that I watch.
Dude, they have, it's like $10 a month, but they have like 20, 30 hours of like tutorials, like full mixing guides and stuff like that on Skillshare.
I really.
Yeah.
There's so many resources out there, and that's the thing. Yeah.
There are. You know, man.
Anybody who wants to do it, take advantage of what you got. You know, it's
agree.
all out there. So you know, if you have the will, like you'll be able to do it.
I agree, man. You know, and especially like now, like I don't think it's like the same where like everything was like in a library somewhere. You know what I mean? Like 30 years ago, you wanted to learn how to like record. Like I think we're coming through like a different era when it comes to like music, but people are so used to the previous era when it comes to music, which was record label, right? Record label, you had to do it through record label. You had no other choice because you literally, yeah. Is that kind of your? I wonder if we're on the same page with a record label. Like I don't think I would ever, unless it was like, even if not even a major label, I would never sign with a major record label because their contracts are so suspicious. I almost said sus. But like even if it was like a very small local record label that like was more newward thinking, I would maybe consider it, but never one of like the big threes.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it would all depend on the contract. But my thing with record labels, and especially because like I played in the local scene, even though it was like the metal scene and all that. Like I've been involved in like more of the indie scene too, like a little bit recently before with the last project that I had. And it is one of those things where you kind of see, like these bands do create an audience like at a local level, and they do. You see how they're able to manage the resources to essentially build it. And even though it may not be ingrained in scale, it's like anything else. At the end of the day, it just takes work. So I genuinely do believe that if you're willing to put in that work, also expose yourself to more, really go out there, not only just, in Florida, but, like push yourselves to, play shows in other countries or not other countries and other states and stuff like that. in other counties of like Florida, for example, it is something that will happen gradually. I think it might take a little bit more time. I think because
But
there is
it's
such
so much
a
more worth it. It's so much more worth it.
exactly
Because if you don't
because
take
those
the time,
contracts
they're so sus.
and record labels too. It's one of those things where I've kind of seen that you know, there was one or two bands I remember they got signed and their first record didn't sell as well as they wanted and they were dropped soon
Dropped.
after.
Yeah, that's actually the norm. I think people are confused. I think everyone thinks they're gonna blow up when they sign, but it's actually the norm that you will get dropped instantly, and then you have to pay that money back. Like any
Yeah,
money
it's
they
just
advance to you, you have to pay back. That's a loan against royalties earned.
you're essentially making this guarantee that everything's gonna sell, and at the end of the day, it's not a guarantee because at the end of the day, and that's the thing, you have to develop a following even before you get signed. So at
Oh
that
yeah,
point, you might as well just do everything yourself and really, embrace that, that more personal level than you would with like a record label and having like other management essentially controlling it.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
those are just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page, and I think more and more people are starting to realize that. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think when you think of it the old way, you know what I mean, like. Because that was the only way you could do it back in the 80s or the 90s, because you couldn't get your CD in a CD store if you didn't have major distribution, i.e. a record label. You couldn't get your you couldn't get your song played on radio if you didn't have a radio promoter. So you needed a record label. You know what I mean? There wasn't Spotify and social media to share your stuff. There wasn't, DistroKid. $20 a month and your song is literally available worldwide or even for free on SoundCloud. You know what I mean? So I think that's it's just technology and communication has just evolved, and that's pretty much changed everything. Especially with
I think
oh, go ahead.
no, finish your statement.
I was gonna say, just curious, you ever heard of NFTs yet? Have you heard anything about NFTs for artists?
NFTs. Oh, what is that actually what's the acronym stand for again?
So this you should get educated on this because I think this is going to be revolutionary in the next 10 years. So NFT stands for non-fungible token. So have you ever been in a video game and bought like a skin that you could wear in the video game?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's an NFT. No. That's an NFT. It's a digital commodity that you buy and you can like then have, right? Well, where this gets crazy is that there's like underlying contracts to specific NFTs. So like a good example that I heard from, I don't know if you know who Gary Vee is, but he gave a really good example of how applicable NFTs could be. Imagine Chipotle comes out with an NFT that's a golden burrito. And underneath that, there's a contract that says if you are the owner of the golden burrito, I mean, we can trace your IP address to the golden burrito and you are specifically the owner, you get free Chipotle for life. And every single time that NFT is resaled, Chipotle gets a 10% commission. So this is a good example of like an NFT and how it would be used practically in like real life. Now, what does this mean for artists? If you wanted to raise money for an album, right, and you, let's say, had a following of 3,000 people, right, like an actual following, I don't mean you like bought them or like, you did follow for follow and they like kind of followed you back and then never like looked at your stuff.
Yeah, active followers.
Like actual people that actually like your music and actively want to be a part of what you're doing, right? And you put out an NFT that could be like a digital art of like what the album cover would be or whatever, right? And you said if you buy this NFT, I'll give you first access to listen to the song. You'll get like, I don't know, like one-on-one dinner, all the things, right? But they have to pay a specific amount of money up front to get all of these things. Then that becomes a great way to crowdsource to like produce the stuff, pay for mixing, pay for mastering, hire the musicians you want, have time to actually do it and not have to work a full-time job. All the stuff, right? So then what happens? Now you're getting money, and then in the NFT contract, you can actually say if they resell it, then you get a 10% commission. So it's actually starting to become very, very practical. I think this is something that's going to be huge in the next 5 years. It's going to absolutely be huge.
More than likely, I can see it blowing up. It's just the way the world's kind of moving right
Yeah.
now. We're always developing new. Like, it's like streaming was revolutionary, and and that took away CDs, and it's just the next step in a natural progression of what it means to be an artist in the 21st century.
Yeah, literally, and I think it's only the beginning. But that's something I just wanted to share with you because just be on the lookout. Just do your research. If you hear about NFT again, which I'm sure you will, you know what I mean. Just be on the
Yeah,
lookout. 'Cause
I've
I
heard
think.
it multiple times before, just not in regards to musicians.
Oh,
So
really?
that's new for me.
Well, it's pretty much like an art thing. Like you can actually use like a sample as an NFT. You could do samples.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's where it's making the most like waves right now. Is you can actually like
Hmm.
sample and like have the NFT be a sample. So like let's say you did the odd men break, right? Let's say somehow you were the owner of the odd men break. Every single time someone uses the odd men break, they have to pay you a royalty. Could you
Yeah, yeah.
imagine that? God, oh my God.
That's just crazy.
That's where it's
It,
going
it, it's
though.
interesting, just the way these things have developed.
Yeah, man.
But it's just like we said in regards to like YouTube and stuff like that, is just take advantage of the resources that are there in the way the world's evolving. Move with the world, because at the end of the day, that's what's
Yeah, the
gonna help
world's
you.
not going to move with you, so you might as well move with the world.
Hmm. Exactly.
All right, awesome, man. So it's been 45 minutes already. I know that kind of flew by, didn't it?
That actually kind of went by a lot quicker than I thought. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. All right, man. Well,
I
if you
like
have
checked
any.
down at the time, and I was like, I could have sworn it was 30 minutes. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good, dude. Yeah, I know. These things kind of fly by. But do you have any last minute parting thoughts or anything like that for everybody?
No, not particularly, but I mean, for anybody listening, like we kind of stated, at the end of the day, if you want to go for it, you want to do, is there something you want to learn, use your resources, use it to the best of your ability, and just it takes practice, like anything else. At the end of the day, I wouldn't consider myself a like professional like among those standards, but it's one of those things where I'm constantly developing, and I know I have the capability of getting better, and so does everybody else. So I'll get there. You guys will get there. That's it.
Awesome, man. I think that's great. Gonna be on Instagram later.
All right.
Are you okay
I'll
if
look
I
out
clip
for
all
it,
this
man.
stuff and clip it and post it? I normally do.
Yeah, no, clip what you want, man. I
Cool.
promise you're all good.
All right, awesome, man. Well, it was great
Anyways,
talking to
no,
you,
it was
dude.
good talking with you, man.
Yeah, we'll have to link up and do some more projects. I have some more stuff I'm trying to line up here.
Yeah, of course, let me know. And honestly, dude, when you sent me that check, I'll be 100% honest with you. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was